Bradley Beal, after spending his entire career thus far in Washington, sucking that franchise dry of all their cash, hamstringing them in terms of their cap flexibility, well, it now looks like sides will work together to find a trade for Bradley Beal, a trade for which Beal is going to control because he's the only player in the league, currently anyway, that has a no trade clause in his agreement, meaning he has to agree to waive that trade clause if he approves the trade. If he doesn't like where the Wizards are wanting to send him, he can say, nah, find something else. And while most would assume, well, teams should be chomping at the bit for a player like Bradley Beal because when healthy, he's actually a great player, an all-star, and could be that piece that puts a title contending team over the top in winning a championship. The problem, though, is it's not that simple. And in fact, very few teams are going to be interested in trading for Bradley Beal, partially because of his enormous contract where he still has 4 years left on his $251 million extension he signed last offseason. And for a guy who is about to be making over $50 million a year and isn't a superstar level player, at least I think most people would not consider him to be a superstar, and you combine that with the fact that he's about to be 30 years old and has had issues staying healthy and on the court, big money to a player that is good but isn't a top 10 player in the league level good, and who has only played in 90 games over the last 2 seasons. Pretty big risk for a team to trade for, but there is one team in the association that might be willing to take on that risk and actually have the trade assets to pull it off, and that's the Miami Heat. So in today's video, we'll talk about how a trade for Beal to the Heat could go down and what's the overall value and impact he could bring to that team. If you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a video, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Also, a big shout out to all of you. We just reached 20,000 subscribers. Very much appreciated. I cannot thank you guys enough. Now, I do want to be clear. No one is denying that Bradley Beal has had a great career in the NBA. One of the best scorers in the game, came into the league when he was 19, right away started making an impact for a young Wizards team, continued to get better and better, and there was even a time period where John Wall and Bradley Beal were considered one of the best backcourt duos in the league. That is before John Wall got injured and never recovered after that. And once John Wall did in fact get injured, it became Bradley Beal's team. He was their best player, their leader, and that's when you saw Beal getting multiple all-star nods, averaging over 30 points per game, a guy who could take over a game and will the Wizards to a win. But at the same time, as great as Beal was, it wasn't really taking the franchise anywhere. Multiple years of missing the playoffs or first round exits with Beal as the #1 option, and sure, a lot of this is on the front office in not putting the right pieces around Beal to maximize having a star player and trying to build a contender, but some of it is also on Beal, who is one of the better players in the league, but is also a flawed star in the sense that he's not that great on defense. Like a lot of stars, he gets tunnel vision and doesn't trust in his teammates, and while he can take over some games and get his team a win, he's also just as likely to shoot his team out of games. And here's the thing, the last 2 seasons, which yes, I realize Beal has had various injuries over the last 2 years, but in the games where he did play, he wasn't playing as well as you would normally expect from him. Still good by normal player standards, but for a guy playing on a $251 million contract, it wasn't even close to the value of money that he's making. In 2021-22, he averaged 23.2 points per game, down from 31 the year prior, and his efficiency dropped significantly. Beal was viewed as a decent three-point shooter in the NBA, 35%, 37%, even 40% over 7 attempts per game the years prior to that 21-22 season, but that fell down to 30% from 3 on over 5 attempts per game. Lower efficiency and on less volume. Not good. And while his shooting got slightly better this past season in 22-23, it didn't improve much to where you said, okay, it was just a down year, he only played 40 games anyway. No, still one of his lower efficient seasons between his true shooting percentage, box plus minus, and win shares. And it's concerning when you see a player who is about to become 30 years old, is on such a large contract, hasn't been able to stay healthy, and you see him starting to show some signs of decline. Now, if I'm the Wizards, I can't wait to trade this guy and simply get his contract off the books. He might be a fine player, but Beal eating up most of your cap space isn't going to get you anywhere as a franchise. And if you're able to get some assets in return for him and get that money off the books, you take that all day. I mean, the Wizards have literally been in a perpetual state of mediocrity for the last decade. An average team, not good enough to really make any noise, but also not bad enough to land a top draft pick. Like, it's time to just hit the reset button and try something else. Go in a different direction, and that starts with trading your all-star in Bradley Beal. But as I mentioned earlier, trading Beal is easier said than done with his contract. When you're making close to $50 million a year, there's only a handful of viable trades around the league to even make the money work where it would make sense for both teams. And I know some folks have been saying, well, really any contending team should be going after him. In theory, yes, if salary caps and matching salaries and trades didn't matter, a lot of contending teams aren't going to be able to afford bringing Beal in, or they're not going to be willing to trade some of their highest paid players because usually, not all the time, but usually your highest paid players are your stars and the guys you want to keep around if you're making a play at Beal to bolster up the star power. But this is where the Miami Heat come in, because for the Miami Heat, a team that just went to the finals, Jimmy Butler, now 33 years old, he'll be 34 by the time next season starts. Kyle Lowry is going to be on an expiring contract. They have big decisions to make on Max Strus and Gabe Vincent. Do they keep Kevin Love around as well for another season, who is already going to be a free agent? Their window to win a title is now. And given the Heat were 25th in offensive rating this past season, they struggled in the finals to get their offense going, finishing that series averaging just 96 points per game across the 5 games. They need a heavy go-to offensive player, and Bradley Beal could be that answer. Because while it would still be Jimmy Butler's team and he would still be the go-to option, by bringing in a player like Beal, Butler can focus more of his attention on defense, still be one of the top scoring options, but he wouldn't need to be relied upon so much on both ends of the floor like he is today. And for Beal, I think most will agree he's not a number 1 option on a contending team. And it's why you've never really seen the Wizards make much progress with him as their go-to scoring option. But Beal as a number 2 option, with added shooters on the roster like the Heat have, that would be the ideal scenario to maximize his game where he doesn't have to do everything, which is what he's currently doing in Washington. Now the question is, what would a trade look like for Bradley Beal going to the Heat? Because the Heat would need to sacrifice some of their future to land Beal, since for the Wizards, if they do decide to blow things up and trigger a rebuild, they're going to want assets they can work with for the future. Trading for Kyle Lowry isn't going to interest them, even though Lowry's salary is actually good in terms of actually making the money work in a trade package, considering he's due $30 million next season. But for the Heat, I think an ideal trade package that would work for both sides is Tyler Hero, because again, you need a young player, and a young player that is actually impactful with upside and you can also use to build your future with. Duncan Robinson, really to make the money work, as he's on a big contract and he's actually turned things around a bit for being a player that was relegated to the bench and out of the rotation. But with Hero going down, Robinson was actually able to see a fair amount of minutes coming off the bench and played well in this past playoff run. Those 2 guys' salary alone would actually be enough to make the money work in matching Beal's salary. But the Wizards are going to want more, partially because they're going to get better offers from other teams who might have draft capital, and you're kind of taking on a bad contract in the deal for Duncan Robinson. Thus, I think you would also need to include one of Max Strus or Gabe Vincent in a sign-and trade and a future first-round pick to make the deal more enticing. I believe the next first-round pick the Heat have to trade is in 2028, which is pretty far into the future, making it less valuable, so the Heat would likely have to make the pick unprotected, or at least very light protection, say top 3 or top 4 protected. So the trade would look like this: Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, either Max Strus or Gabe Vincent, who are both free agents, so a sign trade deal would need to be done for one of them, and a future first-round pick. It might not seem like much for someone like Bradley Beal, but I think people are going to be surprised just how low the trade offers are going to be for Beal, because as I mentioned, it's a big risk of a trade for a player who still has 4 years left on his deal of a supermax contract, has been injury prone as of late, and is entering his 30s. It would be different if he was 25 or 26. And the other reason it's going to be lower than people expect is because Beal has a no trade clause in his contract. He has to approve any trade for which the Wizards bring to him, which means he has the ability to dictate where he gets traded to, and he has the leverage and control. It also means that it gives the Wizards very little leverage on their end when making a trade, because whatever team they're trying to make a trade with, that team knows they can offer less than Beal's value when they know Beal has probably said, I want to go to this team, make it happen. They know the Wizards are going to be under pressure to make a deal work, and thus can't demand the world for him. But I do think the Wizards and Heat will be able to get a deal done. I personally don't like the move for the Miami Heat because I think they would be better off without Beal. And if you're the Heat with an aging Butler and Lowry, you also have to be thinking about your future. And is Bradley Beal really the all-in move that gets them over the top? I don't know. There are a lot of rumors going around that the Heat could be making a move for Damian Lillard, which that I would much prefer to see, but you're going to have to give up a lot more for someone like Lillard. And I don't know if the Heat would be able to pull it off relative to some of the other offers the Blazers might get for Lillard. And at the end of the day, I do still think the Blazers are going to hold on to Dame and try and make a last all-in push to win a title with him. It'll be a mistake, but that's what I think that they're going to do. They're going to try to trade that number 3 pick and some of their younger guys for an already established star. So Lillard to the Heat, while certainly possible, I find it less likely than the Heat being able to acquire someone like Bradley Beal. I would love to hear what you guys think, though. Where do you think Beal will get moved? What would be some of the best options, not only for himself, but for the team that he goes to? Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.